This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and various different guests. And today I'm joined by Jemima Bowker, who lots of you will remember, I hope. She's the person who is working with me doing the research of both balcony gardening and beginner gardening, because Jemima is young and she doesn't have a proper full-size garden. She gardens on balconies. Hello, Jemima. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm very well, thanks. Nice to be back here chatting with you.
Good. And like lots of people at sort of Jemima's stage in life, in her turn of the 30s, well, the 20s to the 30s, and like my children, she's on the move quite a lot. You know, you don't tend to be in the same place. And so we thought we would talk about that because May, it's a changeover for pots, but it's like Jemima is on the move. She's got to move from her flat where she is at the moment. And that is just such a common thing, isn't it? That people can't put their roots down. They haven't got a garden. And so we thought we would just chat about that sort of transportability of containers. So, Mimes, what are the pots that you've got currently?
So I have a big, well, big-ish, it's small really in the grand scheme of things, but I have a balcony that is kind of northeast facing, and I have crammed it with pots, mainly did it this autumn. And I've got two kind of big zinc dolly tubs. I've got a selection of smaller zinc tubs and some terracotta pots. And then I've got a couple of windowsill planters, and I've got a balcony overhanging planter. And then I've got a couple of bigger tubs, some like our green tub planter, which I absolutely love, and then some scrambled together stuff from kind of Facebook Marketplace finds. And it's really crammed full and I absolutely love it, but there's no space to even sit out there. I have got a table with some pots on it, but my poor husband Charlie does like, be nice to be able to enjoy the balcony, but it's full of pots. And anyway, I got so excited in autumn when I planted them all. And now I'm thinking, I've now got to move with them all, which is really lovely that you can move things with you, because in a way that's so nice that it's not just completely starting from scratch, because you can have stuff, you know, I don't know how I'm going to transport them, but
You're your tortoise with your house on your back.
Exactly. And it will be a real feeling of home. And they'll just be like, depending on the time, I mean, it will hopefully be towards the end of this month, but a little bit of an instant garden, which will be really lovely. And that is, I guess, the joy of containers. But yeah, the bulbs were really amazing. And I kind of crammed it full at that time of year. And April's been fab and kind of early spring. But now I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't quite know where these containers are going to be living in a couple of months' time. And so I'm trying to think about doing something with them before I move, but also it's a bit tricky because it's a bit of an unknown as to where they're going to be, in terms of, are they going to be in a sunny garden? Are they going to be in the shade? Will it be exposed? All of those questions. So it's a bit of a tricky one, but I'm sure with some guidance from you, I'll be able to figure something out.
I do think, I think there's one key thing which is so unbelievably obvious that I'm sorry that I'm even mentioning it, but the thing is to leave them unwatered for a good week or even two before you move, because of course the main thing will be the water that gives the weight. And you know, I think you're on the third floor, aren't you? I mean, it's going to be quite a thing lifting all those down. It's going to be like moving a second house. But also, I really like zinc for that reason, which is if the compost within it is dry, then it's a relatively light material. Whereas terracotta, unfortunately, you know, because, again, it's lighter if it's dry, but if it's like a sponge, so it can be quite heavy. But you haven't got any plastic pots, have you? Because you don't like the aesthetic of them.
I don't, although there are better ones coming out for sure. There's way more available. And some of the plastic pots actually look amazing. And I know you've got a couple at Perch Hill that you've kind of been trialing and testing, and they are really, if you look closely, you can tell, but from a distance, you can't. So I think they're great. But I prefer the zinc and the terracotta, and they get better and better. They age better, which I guess you maybe don't get so much with a plastic. But what I have got in the big zinc dollies, because if they were full of compost, no matter how light it is, I have actually, that would be super heavy. So I have got those in a successional plastic tubs.
Yeah.
And I haven't, it's not that windy where I am. So I know sometimes we advise that maybe you'd put a couple of bricks at the bottom or something, just in case they get blown over in the wind, because they could be quite top heavy. But for me, for moving, it's just like so much easier. So I limit my terracotta pots to just small kind of tables, nothing bigger than maybe a pot that I'd put a pelargonium in. But my bigger pots are all zinc, and I love them. And they can take a bashing if you drop them. Maybe you'll get a bit of a dent, but you're not going to smash the whole thing, which with the terracotta pot, there is a risk, and they come with a heftier price tag as well. So one day when I'm in my kind of forever home, wherever that may be, I will definitely invest in some huge terracotta pots, but not for now, for sure. No.
So I think you should pick my brains as much as you possibly can in the time that we have. So May is the great changeover moment. So obviously you planted them in October, November time with the bulbs, which are now going over. And now May, as the tulips, narcissus, etc., brown, and the foliage really dies back. It's time to whip them out and move on to the next thing. So shall we start with your smaller tabletop pots and move up gradually to the biggest ones? So what are you thinking vaguely are going to be your designs for your summer small pots?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be a good place to start. So my small pots were fab, and I planted them for spring with tiny little sweet bulbs, which on a tabletop were just so lovely. But for me, for summer, I want something that needs as like little TLC as possible. And I know with pots for minimal TLC, the ultimate answer is the bigger the pot, the better. And they are quite teeny tiny pots, so I know they'll need regular watering and so on. But I was kind of, my first thought, as always with small pots, because I just remember them being everywhere at Perch Hill and they seem to survive kind of hell or high water, was the Erigeron, which I just love, the little Mexican daisy, which just looks so airy and elegant and lovely. And I feel like might be okay in sun and shade, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, pretty tolerant.
Yeah.
Very good.
So definitely some of that. And then I was trying to think, because some of them are, really small pots, and I don't really know what else to put in them. Like, I guess if I'd been more organised, maybe I would have had some violas, but do they go all the way through the summer?
Yeah, if you sow them late. I mean, if you sowed them now, they would be in flower in 10 weeks and they would go on flowering right the way through to the autumn. I do love those, but I have had some thoughts for you. And the first, because I know you love to cook, I think bush basil for you would be really good in your small pots. So the Greek bush basil, and you could literally just sow a they will need to be in the sun, but you can just be incredibly stingy with your seed, but just a sprinkle of 2 or 3 seeds into the top of each pot. And if more come up, I would thin them as soon as you see the first pair of leaves, but you can do them straight into the pot. And they naturally form almost like a mini box ball, so they don't take any training. Just when you're picking them, you just want to get like scissors and just literally shape them like you would a box ball. So you're taking almost just like a shaving of the outermost leaves, and that will then refresh their growth. So they'll keep coming back more and more and more. And then you'll find as soon as the nights get cold in September or October, they'll start to get botrytis and look pretty ropey. But for a really nice sunny window ledge or balcony or doorstep, they would be really good. Related to those, I would go for the Texas wild tomato, which is the most tolerant of all tomatoes. It's a vine. Well, no, more like a trailer in Texas. And I find just one seedling of those into a small pot and just let it trail wherever it wants to go. Those are really, really nice and unusual. Quite acidic fruit, but I quite like it actually for a tomato sauce, of course, with the bush basil. And the more you pick, the more it crops. And so, again, really nice for a foodie person like you. And then the final one, for very shallow trays that I find works incredibly well, unbelievably tolerant. You can do anything to them and they don't die in the summer. They are not frost hardy, so they have to come in the winter, but any of the Echevera family. And they're like sort of mini cactuses. But I remember with my children, when they went off to university, that was one of the things that I could give them for their university rooms on a window ledge. And inside or out, they're unbelievably tolerant. And they really, really don't need watering. So I would say those three, as well as you say, your Erigeron would be really brilliant for tabletop pots for the summer.
I hadn't thought about the bush basil, actually, and I remember seeing them in pots at Perch Hill and thinking they're so ornamental, but so kind of dinky. And it's nice to be able, it's like that's a kind of look that I guess on a small scale is quite hard to achieve. Whereas if you can have these little lovely pots, then that's fun. And I didn't realise that you kind of harvest them so you don't pick full leaves, you actually just kind of shape the bush.
You literally you kind of sculpt them more. And so what about your medium, your sort of middle size? So what are we talking now, kind of 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres type thing?
Yeah, exactly, like those. And I've got a couple of leaf planters, the kind of zinc leaf planters, which are similar in size, but a little bit shallower and more oval shaped. So naturally, my first port of call is that I have my pelargoniums that are inside that need to come back outside at some stage. They've kind of been a little bit neglected, but I had to cut them back in kind of late winter, early spring, because I still had issues with aphids. I'm hoping that wherever I move next, maybe it will be a slightly better environment for them, but I'm sure it's something I'm doing wrong. So I am going to plant them out in pots. They'll all probably have their own pot. And then I was thinking salad, because like I just think to be able to grow, and it might not be, I probably won't grow lettuces because there's something I can get from a nice local farmer's market or something, but to be able to grow some interesting salad leaves will be super nice. And they're so easy and I can cut and come again, so they can just keep us going throughout the summer. And I think if I plant them now, if I sow them from seed now, will they get going pretty quickly, I feel?
Very much so. Again, just a pinch into the top.
Yeah, and I'd love to get some herbs as well.
Yeah, but, I was going to say herbs.
I might buy them as
plugs.
Just to get a bit of a head start.
Yeah.
So I think probably that, because I have a lot of pots, but not loads.
So definitely agree with you on the edibles and the pelargoniums, and I would definitely add the phlox drummondiis because they're cut and come again flowers, and so you can pick them to bring inside. And actually that will prolong the flowering outside too. And creme brulee is the one that's so fashionable at the moment. But I also love, there are really quite a lot coming onto the market. And from the moment that we were doing the stand at Chelsea last May, right the way through until the middle of November, we had various ones like 21st century blue, 21st century white and purple. And I just picked and picked and picked for them, just little posies to go by my bed and in the bathroom and stuff. But that really prolonged how good they looked in the pots outside. So I'm mad keen on those, and they have a gentle scent. Some more than others. The richer colours seem to be slightly more scented. But yeah, I would say those.
Yeah, I love those. I love how they cascade over the pots. It's so kind of elegant. And I've always kind of associated phlox drumondii with occasionally getting kind of mildewy towards the end of their life. Is that just keeping them ideally somewhere well ventilated?
Yeah.
Is the best thing.
And picking will help with that, because of course by picking you're upping the air circulation, and so actually by harvesting you're really keeping the structure open, and that's fungal problems really build up when it's all sort of clogged in the centre. So if you can keep picking, you will really help protect that. But you're right, by the end of September, some of them will be looking at creme brulee, tends to look a bit ropey by that stage of the year. But I find the 21st century ones carry on looking pretty good late. And I would really recommend to you one of the calabricoas. But I think on a smaller scale, I really like just one on its own, one colour on its own. So whether you're going for one of the doubles, there's one called Double Wine Red, which I think is beautiful, very velvety, or whether you want a real splash of a strong one, an orange one, for instance. But don't mix the colours in a small pot, just go for one. That's what I would do.
Would I be really generalising, and kind of, is this a terrible thing to say, that are these basically smaller, more compact versions similar to petunias?
Yeah.
Or are they, is that fair to say?
Totally.
Okay.
But that's why they're suited to a middle-sized pot. Whereas I would have said a Petunia Tidal Wave Red Velour for one of your whopper pots, because it's so good. But it's such a romper. It would drown. I think it would choke in a medium-sized pot.
And finally, the only other thing I was thinking was, when you mentioned Chelsea, was what about some of the Nemesias?
Totally.
Like that Lady Ruby was just so amazing.
Yeah.
And that was in a kind of mid-small size pot, I guess.
Yeah, but that Lady Ruby flowers April, May and June, whereas if you want a later one, you want Lady Lisa or one of the other ones, and they flower more like July, August, September, or certainly June, July, August. And then Wisley Vanilla, which is very scented, again is an earlier one. So next year you could do that. But I think if you did them now as we go into May, you would find that they were going over really before you move. So they do divide the Nemesias between the sort of, as I say, the April, May ones, and then the sort of June, July, August ones.
I didn't realise
And
that.
you can give them a haircut, and Wisley Vanilla usually comes back after its first flush of flowering. But I definitely think Lady Anne would be probably a better one for you for later.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely having to accept that I've got a serious case of like May gap syndrome going on.
Oh, okay.
And
Lady Ruby would be good.
But as in, like, I've kind of just accepted that I'm going to be moving, life's going to be chaos. So I can just kind of plan ahead for a beautiful late summer plots wherever they are. Good. But it's a good thing to think about for next year, because I think I was just so focused on my bulbs that I didn't really think about things like
afterwards,
biennials and afterwards. So to kind of tide me through. But that sounds good.
And then big pots. So what are you thinking for your big pots?
Well, I feel like the obvious suggestion would be obviously to have some dahlias in there, but I haven't got any tubers because of my situation. And so it's kind of perfect timing to, I guess, see what's available and buy some ready planted ones, which is kind of perfect timing to be doing that anyway. So I love the kind of ochre, rusty, softer colours, and probably singles, because they just seem to be better in pots and also nice for pollinators, which is lovely. So I'm thinking a kind of selection of what's out there and what's available, because I know I've left it a little bit last minute, but that's not a problem. And then with that, I love the Thunbergia African Sunset kind of as something. I'm imagining this for my two big zinc dollies, so I definitely need something to trail over. So I'm thinking the Thunbergia, which I just absolutely love. And can I cut that? Can that be? Is it cut and come again?
Yeah, it's a bit of a fiddle because you have to unravel it from its climbing frame. But yeah, I do pick it. I pick it with the phlox that we're just talking about. Creme brulee actually looks beautiful.
Yeah, that would be nice. And then I need some kind of filler, I think. So my obvious choice would be to kind of go for some panicum, the sparkling fountain, to just add nice airiness. But what else would work well there?
Well, I think you definitely want a climber. So you've got the Thunbergia, but honestly, the plant that I was most grateful to, well, there were lots, but in terms of a climber that's also edible, that just gave me so much pleasure last summer, was definitely the yellow climbing bean called Monte Gusto. And so I would put some sort of teepee. If you can get silver birch, so much the better. But if you can't, use bamboo canes and string them. And then on each bamboo, I would plant a Monte Gusto seedling or seed. And Adam and I had those for supper from July, August and into September, at least 3 or 4 times a week. And yes, we had 10 plants, and you may only have 5, but it was just an absolute winner for and would be completely happy in a container. So I would definitely say those. And I couldn't not talk about sort of slightly larger containers and not talk about Cosmos. And again, for me, we had a trough planter around the lawn last summer with the classic white one, the container suitable one, Sonata White, I think it's called. And I was picking from it 3 or 4 times a week just to bring in little posies, but it looked really incredible until the end of October. So I think for a sort of sunny place, that would be ideal.
And it's also north facing as well, because I remember seeing those and thinking, I wonder if they're going to be
Yes.
as amazing, considering, the back of that barn is quite shady quite a lot of the day, but actually they were incredible.
Yeah.
So actually that's maybe a good one for me, because I do need to accept that they might not have full sun available to them. And with the beans that you mentioned, could they share a pot with the dahlia?
Yeah, I reckon. Because the thing is, the beans are doing all its stuff up here. I mean, the dahlia, the one that I recommend, if you like that sort of coppery, ochre tone, which I think you were saying you did, would be Skipper's Bronze, named after my Dutch friend, Dickie Skipper. And that is brilliant for a container, brilliant for pollinators, mostly single, a few flowers are semi-double, a really lovely cut flower, incredibly elegant and quite pot compatible. And that growing with the yellow bean up and over and through it would be really fantastic. So I would really recommend that.
Okay. And I'll get seedlings in for most of these, because I'm going to be a little bit on the back foot, but should get going.
Yeah, and now is the perfect time for seedlings. So any time sort of from the 1st to the last week of May couldn't be a better time, because the frost, certainly in London where you are, will be well over now. And you can start planting. What's going to be your planting medium?
Yes, so this is my next question, that I just thought it'd be quite helpful to run through some kind of more, I guess, like basic questions about where, if you've just bought a pot and you want to fill it and make something lovely, like where to start. So I typically always plant into our peat-free multi-purpose compost, but that I understand is great for annual plants and flowers. But if I was planting so I will, for all the ones that we've just talked about now, I'll definitely just use that, and I'll make sure I put some drainage in the bottom, whether that's some broken pots, which I might have a few of after the move, or maybe not, let's see. Sometimes if I get frozen food deliveries, they come in those polystyrene boxes, which I can't bear to throw it away, but I equally don't really know what else to do with it. So sometimes I break that up and use that at the bottom of pots, which I remember seeing Josie doing at Perch Hill.
Yeah.
So I'll use as much of that. For big pots, I won't even put any grit in or mix any grit in. Should I be? Or is that not really necessary?
No, you don't need to. I mean, you luckily don't have any real whoppers. I mean, if I've got real whoppers at Perch Hill, what we tend to do, and Josie's taught me this, is think of it in layers of 3. So the bottom layer, which actually forms about half, is just full of all our potting shed rubbish. So plastic pots, polystyrene pots, even X bags of compost, as long as you don't let them form a seal on the bottom, And you're just filling it with rubbish, because you just don't need the depth in a whopper pot. And then the half is divided between mainly our own homemade compost, which comes out of the compost heap, but that will have weed seed in it. And so we then just top off literally the top 3 or 4 inches. So let's say sort of 10 centimetres with a bagged compost, and we use our own peat-free compost mix. And the reason for that is there's no weed seed in it, because it's been composted at such a high temperature. And that will mean no weeds competing with your seedlings, and you're planting all your lovely seedlings into a beautiful friable compost. So 3 layers.
Okay. And for me, I obviously don't have access to some of those ingredients. So if I, for example, have some big pots that have had bulbs in them that I've then taken out, I would ideally not be refilling that pot with a whole bag of compost, because it's quite a lot of compost that I need to get through. Can I keep the bottom half of that? How fresh does compost need to be? So just top half fine?
Yeah, we totally change everything once a year. And to be honest, normally that would be before the May planting, because bulbs don't need high fertility, whereas some of these things are quite quick growing, all the annuals, and they do need more fertility. But so what I would do is I would put your old compost into the bottom layer. So rather than the potting shed waste or whatever, use that in the bottom layer, and then and sort of, quite a far up, but do have the top 15 centimetres bagged bulk compost, so it's got the fertility. And I would put a slow release fertiliser in that middle layer, the middle and the top layer, but particularly in that middle layer, because as the roots go down into it, that's where you need the fertility as well as the water retention. And so, a slow release pelleted fertiliser would be a really good addition, because that just means they're going to be more self-caring, really.
And you do that on planting? Because my understanding was that like compost, for example, has a multi-purpose compost would have maybe 6 weeks of kind of feed to sustain it. But you would actually, so I would be like, okay, I don't need to put anything in that for the first 6 weeks. Whereas you would actually say, put something in at the beginning as well, whether it's some chicken manure pellets or something.
Because absolutely right that you have got 4 to 6 weeks in a bagged compost of fertility. But then how are you going to get the feed in there later? So I would do it from the get-go, just so you don't have to worry about August, September, October, basically. And then a foliar feed is a good thing. We use quite a lot of SP Invigorator, which is a mineral-based, I think, spray-on organic sort of plant tonic is, I think, what it tends to be called. And we use a lot of liquid seaweed fertilizer. And so, again, don't worry about that until mid-August probably. But then you want to water every other day, ideally, and you want to feed once a week.
I know I'd love to get some, because I obviously don't have the space or need for a wheelbarrow, but it is so handy for filling with water and putting your small pots in. I need to get to find maybe some little trays that I can kind of gather them on and have them sitting in water so that if I'm away or I just don't have too much going on, then I can not worry about it too much and not feel the pressure to be around to water. But one of the big things that I think, and I think this is the thing that everyone, especially if you're new to gardening, really struggles with, is like, how many plants do I put in my container?
Okay.
Like, can I cram them? Is there a rule of thumb? Can I have too many, too few? And I know it's hard because plants are all different varying sizes, but if there's any kind of rule of thumb, I think that would be super helpful.
There is. So we go for half the normal garden spacing. So, for instance, something relevant to now planting. So one of the compact cosmos in the garden, you would plant at 30 centimetres. So they're going in at 15. Or tidal wave red velour petunia, which actually should go in at 40 centimetres, we're putting it at 20. So that's a general rule of thumb. You won't go far wrong there. You may overstuff, but actually, if you're also picking from your pots and you're doing a foliar feed with one of the things I've talked about, that would be fine.
That is very helpful. And what about if you've got a perennial in a pot and it's, for example, like, that makes sense for annuals, I guess. But if you've got a perennial in a pot, for example, I've got some geums that I've bought last year at the end of the Chelsea Flower Show, which I think have survived about okay over winter, but we'll see. So if I want to put them in with a pot, with some annuals, I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with those geums yet. But do similar rules apply?
I probably would do them a bit further apart if they're going to be in there for a few years. So I would do 2/3 the normal spacing. So I wouldn't halve it. I would just bring it down by about 1/3 as a general rule with a perennial in a pot. And then I really would plan to lift and divide it and sort of move it on, pot it on. Rather than every 3 years, I would do it every 2 years.
Because it's going to be kind of bursting out of its pot.
Yeah,
a little bit as well.
With a terracotta, it might end up breaking the pot. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a plectranthus in a terracotta pot, which was beginning to outgrow itself towards the end of the summer, and it's been inside over winter, kind of not growing a huge amount, but I think it needs to be rehomed for sure.
And you can take cuttings from it at the same time.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Jemima. Well, it's lovely to chat. I hope that's helped you.
Well, thank you. It's very helpful.
Good luck with the move, is what I'd say.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I'll need a separate van for the pots, so that'll be a challenge in itself, but we'll get there.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Speak soon.
Thanks so much for listening to the podcast Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange with me, Sarah Raven, and Jemima Bowker on her balcony garden. Next week, I'm on my own, so see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.